Did you know Fast Growing Trees is America's largest and most trusted online nursery with thousands of trees and plants and over 2 million happy customers? Whether you're planting fruit trees, adding privacy, brightening things up with flowers, or bringing in houseplants, Fast Growing Trees has it all. Even better, they can help you find options that are right for your climate, your space, and lifestyle. Click Order Grow. Every plant arrives healthy with the Alive and Thrive guarantee straight to your door. So if you're ready to get planting, this is the moment. Right now, they have great deals on spring planting essentials, up to half off on select plants. And listeners to our show get 20% off their first purchase when using the code WWO at checkout. That's an additional 20% off. Better plants and better growing at fastgrowingtrees.com using the code WWO at checkout. Fastgrowingtrees.com, code WWO. Now's the perfect time to plant. Let's grow together. Use WWO to save today. Offer is valid for a limited time. Terms and conditions apply. Go to growingfasttrees.com for details.
I sold my car in Carvana last night.
Well, that's cool.
No, you don't understand. It went perfectly. Real offer, down to the penny. They're picking it up tomorrow. Nothing went wrong.
So, what's the problem?
That is the problem. Nothing in my life goes as smoothly. I'm waiting for the catch.
Maybe there's no catch.
That's exactly what a catch would want me to think.
Wow, you need to relax.
I need to knock on wood. Do we have wood? Is this table wood?
I think it's laminate.
Okay, yeah, that's good. That's close enough.
Car selling without a catch. Sell your car today on Carvana. Pickup fees may apply.
I'm here on the job site with Dale, who's a framing contractor.
Hey, good morning.
Dale traded up to Geico Commercial Auto Insurance for all his business vehicles. We're here where he needs us most.
Yep, they sure are.
We make it easy for him to save on all his insurance needs, all in one place, with coverage that fits his business and bottom line. Oh, I shouldn't have looked down.
It's all right.
We're so far up here.
Look at me. Take a deep breath.
No, I'm good. So good.
Get a commercial auto insurance quote today at geico.com and see how much you could save. It feels good to Geico.
Barley is the cereal grain most associated with brewing, though it's certainly not the only one. There are a number of other grains often used to make beer, as anyone who has made an oatmeal stout, a hazy IPA, or a cream ale is very well aware. You're listening to the Brülosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and today I'm joined by contributor Jordan Folks to talk about one of the more common adjunct grains, corn.
It seems that there's a time in a brewer's career that they get really interested in adjuncts, and I think I'm having a bit of a honeymoon with them yet again. It's so fun to play around with other things beyond Pilsner, and you can make some really characterful beers, and corn is definitely one of my favorite adjuncts.
Oh, without a doubt. And as is the case for so many things in brewing, corn also comes in various forms. And many believe this has a noticeable impact on the characteristics that the corn actually imparts to the beer. I've certainly used my fair share of corn, mostly in the form of flaked maize, though I've also had success using corn grits. One of the things that I've yet to use is malted corn. So I'm curious to learn more about this unique ingredient with you today, Jordan. Now, if you're a fan of this show and you'd like to receive a reward for supporting us, please consider becoming a patron of Brülosophy over at patreon.com/Brülosophy, where you make a small pledge and receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique perks from YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to monthly live brew days with Brülosophy contributors, among many other things. You can learn more about all of the rewards we offer for your support over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. Another really easy way to support us is by using the links found at brülosophy.com/support when you're shopping online. Your experience won't change at all, and we get a little commission for that referral. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a rating and review of our show in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, we'd appreciate that, as well as it makes it easier for those who have yet to hear of us to find the show on those platforms. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who I'm convinced are doing perhaps more than any other company to keep this hobby alive, whether that's through making awesome brewing and beer-related videos for their YouTube channel, continuing to improve on already great brewing gear, or spreading the love by sponsoring outfits like us. Clawhammer offers brewers various options for high-quality, reasonably priced electric brewing rigs in various voltages and sizes. I've used both their 120-volt and 240-volt systems. They're both awesome. Clawhammer Supply really does put the effort into ensuring their systems do exactly as they're intended to do in as efficient a way as possible. And if you're not ready to make the jump to electric just yet, they also sell 10 and 20-gallon brew-in-a-bag homebrewing starter kits. Whatever it is you're looking for, do yourself a favor and visit clawhammersupply.com. We're confident you're going to love their stuff just as much as we do. All right, listener DWRex88 left us the following message on Spotify regarding something from last week's episode on Hoppy Lager. He said, "It's not that I don't like Nelson, it's that my palate doesn't. I've tried and I continue to try beers with Nelson hops. However, it tastes like green bell pepper to me, and that's not a flavor I want in my beer. I have a friend who experiences the same thing. It seems like a cilantro type deal, delicious or soap. I brewed an NZ Pilsner once and thought I did something wrong because it smelled and tasted like green pepper. I brewed it again without changing anything, and it tasted the same as the first." Jordan, I have not heard Nelson Sauvin as being a hop that imparts that green pepper character. I typically hear like white grape or wine, but is that something you've heard before?
I have never heard that. And like the cilantro comment, I could see how if there's some sort of genetic predisposition against it, it would not be an enjoyable beverage. I do not get bell pepper, and I am very sorry for the people that do, because that is an otherwise really beautiful hop.
Yeah, it's beautiful, but it's also pretty divisive. And, you know, the subjectivist that I am, I have zero qualms with the fact that there are people out there who don't like it while I love it. In fact, even though I do love it, I totally get why others don't. My first experience with Nelson was all the way back in 2011. A buddy of mine who lives down in San Diego made a pale ale hopped entirely with Nelson. And when I took that first sip, I was like, what is in this beer? What did you do to this? It was wild how pungent and just insanely strong that characteristic was that I had never smelled in any other hop. Every time I've used it since, I get that same character, which truly does stand on its own, at least so far from the hops that I've tried. I think it's incredible, but again, I totally get why other people might not like it. So if you don't like it, just don't use it. That leaves more for people like Jordan and me who love it. Do you tend to use it on its own, or do you like to blend it with other hops?
I think in the West Coast IPA or West Coast Pilsner, heck, even Cold IPA realm, it really can go with almost anything in the kind of more modern American varieties like Mosaic, Citra, etc. Or it can go really well with any of the New Zealand varieties. But it also stands on its own. And so a single hopped Saison, a single hopped Pilsner, even like a pale ale or like an IPA with a ton of Nelson, it really is fairly versatile and plays well with others, but also stands apart on its own well, which is one of the reasons I love it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm in the same boat, and I believe it was a commercial brewery called Alpine Brewing or something. They're down from San Diego that had like the first all Nelson hopped beer,
right.
And it was phenomenal. I mean, here's the thing about Nelson, in my experience, is it tastes like Nelson. There's like no other hop variety that has that crazy pungency that I get from Nelson. And I guess that's part of what I like so much about it, is how unique it is. But again, if you don't like it, don't use it. If you don't like it the first few times you use it, chances are you're not going to like it in the future. It's just that unique. So we love it. DWRex88, you're not a big fan, and that's okay. So if you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brulosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. All right, don't forget to grab your Brülosophy merch over at brulosophy.com/shop. We're offering more options than we ever have before, from t-shirts, hoodies, and hats to fanny packs, shorts, coffee mugs, and way more than that. Prices are surprisingly reasonable, and international shipping is now available. Again, you can head to brulosophy.com/shop, click one of the product images on that page. That's going to redirect you to our Dashery store. You can go straight there, brulosophy.dashery.com. We've also put a link in the description of this episode.
Hey, sweetie, your mother showed me this Carvana thing for selling the car. I'm gonna give it a try. Wish me luck. Me again. I put in the license plate. It gave me an offer. Unbelievable. Okay, I accepted the offer. They're picking it up Tuesday from the driveway. I haven't even left my chair. It's done. The car is gone. I'm holding a check. Anyway, Carvana, give it a whirl. Love ya.
So good, you'll want to leave a voicemail about it. Sell your car today on Carvana. Pickup fees may apply.
Stop guessing and start perfecting your craft with Brewfather, the ultimate tool for recipe design. Brewfather Premium unlocks advanced inventory tracking, tilt integration for real-time fermentation monitoring, and seamless cloud sync across all of your devices. But wait, there's more. Premium Plus just changed the game with Brewfather's brand new AI recipe integration. Whether you're looking to clone a rare commercial classic or need a creative spark for a unique grain bill, Brewfather AI helps you build balanced, world-class recipes in seconds. Brewing is a science. Make it art with Brewfather Premium Plus by visiting brewfather.app today. That's brewfather.app. Better beer is just a click away. Up until the last decade or so, at least by my recollection, corn was almost universally viewed as an unnecessary ingredient in beer, used by huge commercial breweries to apparently cut costs and quality. Maybe it was the recognition of the amazingness of cream ale, or the fact craft brewers started using things like corn sugar in higher OG IPA to improve dryness, but the hate seems to have leveled out a bit when it comes to corn, which I think is a really good thing because I love using corn, particularly in styles like cream ale or double IPA. Before we get into the details of malted corn, which I feel like is a very unique product, at least for the times that we're in now, let's chat a bit about corn in the context of brewing and beer first.
Sure. So corn is a cereal grain, and it comes from, it's actually just a tall grass. And, it grows pretty tall, as high as an elephant's eye is what they say. And there's a few different varieties, Americans and, humans, I guess, tend to eat sweet corn, which is like a 10% sugar content. But there's also field corn, and that could be used for other food products like corn chips, corn flour, corn syrup, and in our case, maybe even brewing. And it's not nearly as sweet. And there's more starch there. You could see how that could be more, beneficial perhaps for brewing. So that's more like 4% sugar content. So you could see with half the sugar content, it might not taste nearly as sweet if you were trying to eat it as a vegetable.
Yeah, exactly. And, when most people hear corn, they hear, they automatically think of the sweet corn that we all eat, which makes sense. That's where my mind immediately goes as well. Or potentially to the, often discussed, though very rarely actually tasted dimethyl sulfide, or DMS, in beer. I'm very cynical when it comes to people thinking that they taste off flavors these days. But, sweet corn is exactly how it sounds. It's that nice, sweet, crunchy corn that we're also used to at barbecues and such. The other stuff, not so much. It's much more starchy. It can be a lot more dense. I've actually had the opportunity. I believe, in fact, hominy is made out of field corn. And that's when they soak those corn kernels in like a basic solution of lye and whatnot, and it kind of expands. A lot of products come from that field corn, which is I believe the vast majority of the corn that's grown, at least in the United States, is technically field corn. So kind of a cool, thing to learn, in my opinion. Now, there's this, when we think about the reasons a brewer, particularly on the commercial scale, might use corn, you and I were talking earlier, Jordan, about a potential myth that is involved in this. And I'm not entirely sure whether it's myth or if we're missing something here, but there's an idea that the reason commercial brewers, we're talking Bud, Miller, Coors, rely so heavily on corn adjunct, or some of them use rice. I think Bud Light is known for having rice in it, is because it's, cheaper than malted barley. But a very simple search, at least for pound, of any, home brewing website like Northern Brewer, More Beer, whatever it might be, that's not necessarily true. Again, pound for pound, it's not true.
Now, maybe back in the 1800s or whatever, when adjunct brewing really took off in America, there was an agronomic reason for that, corn was plentiful, here in the Americas. And so maybe that made a lot of sense, not to mention when they were using the 6-row barley, maybe the adjunct made a better enzymatic package collectively. But in 2026, it's really hard to argue that corn, at least at the price points that a home brewer can access, is cheaper. When you look at the price per pound, malted corn and flaked corn is more expensive than a German Pilsner malt. So maybe you could find some sort of local 2-row well, heck, that's probably going to be way cheaper, right? And so maybe there's some edge cases where somehow there's some expensive European import barley that's more expensive than some local corn. But generally speaking, it seems that per pound corn is more expensive, at least when it's been processed. I'm sure raw corn from like a farm supply feed store would be cheaper than malted barley. But when you look at the the PPG, which is that maximum potential gravity of a product, corn doesn't really dramatically exceed malt. So look, I got a couple listed here. We got cracked corn, so that's raw, unmalted corn. That's only 30 ppg. And then when you get to flaked corn, that's 33 to 40 ppg. And fresh sweet corn is only 15 ppg. So this list I have doesn't have malted corn on it, but to put that in perspective, malted Pilsner malt is about 36 to 37 ppg on average. So corn is either in the same range or maybe even a little lower if you're looking at the crack stuff. So generally speaking, it seems that corn, at the homebrew level would be more expensive unless you are getting super cheap like feed and doing a cereal cook mash.
Yeah. Maybe
you could eke out a price benefit there, but with a lower PPG, it seems like it's kind of a wash.
Yeah, so I did a little bit of poking around. I can't help but reference the beer that I probably drink more than anything else, Miller Lite. It is known for having corn in its recipe, and by corn, I believe, again, and this is just based on my research, so whatever exists out there on the internet, they rely on corn syrup, not high fructose corn syrup. They're using, sweet corn syrup, and that is significantly cheaper than barley malt. And I have to imagine that, the prices that we see as homebrewers are, no matter what, they're going to be more expensive than even a craft brewer is going to pay, which is going to be more expensive than what somebody who's buying, millions of pounds a year is going to pay, right? And so I do still think that there's economical reasons for these big commercial breweries leaning on, corn and rice and other adjuncts. But like you said, on the craft brewing scale, when we're buying flaked maize, I mean, you're going to basically, like you said, the PPG is not that different. If you're making 50,000 gallons, maybe you're going to see some cost savings there. But if you're making 5 gallons, unless you consider 35 cents or so cost savings, the flaked maize is going to cost a little bit more than your barley, but it does contribute, or ostensibly it contributes certain things that we really brewers tend to want in their beers that they're using that corn in, if that makes sense. For example, it is known for increasing the strength of a beer while contributing very little in the way of additional aroma, flavor, or especially, in my opinion, mouthfeel. You're not going to get any beta glucans from it. You're not going to get, it is going to get in there. You're going to extract as much of the fermentable sugar as possible, and then it gets out of the way. That's the reason that I have been so keen on using it whenever the 3 times a year I make a double IPA. I'm using, I usually lean on sugar nowadays, so I'll go table sugar. But before I was afraid, back in the days when I was afraid of table sugar, I would just get a bunch of flaked maize and throw in like 2 pounds, and you don't taste it. It doesn't taste like corn, especially when you're throwing in all those hops. So that's one of the things that I used to use flaked maize for all the time. Nowadays, if I'm using flaked maize, it's almost always for cream ale, which is supposed to be basically an ale version of an American lager. So what are your thoughts, or what are the ways that you use flaked or corn in general?
Yeah, I've only done one cereal mash in my life, and it was with rice. So I've definitely want to get around to doing a cereal mash with corn, because one of the things I've heard is that the less processed an ingredient is, the better flavor you can get out of it when brewing with adjunct. And maybe there's also some rumors, floating around that some of the corn that maybe they're using for the flaked product is not the highest quality. And if you can get your hands on some really cool heirloom varieties and do a cereal mash, you can have some really fun and flavorful outcomes. Bierstadt does an annual corn lager using some heirloom pink and blue corn or something like that, and it's so nice. It has there's a flavor, absolutely, with some of these more characterful varieties. And so, that might be something I'm going for, is actually trying to drive some corn flavor into my beer. So I guess I'm not really using it to displace flavor, but I'm hoping to actually gain some.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like that's kind of a unique perspective. I do think that you can get corn flavor. Don't get me wrong. But it would be in the way that you use it would, I think, determine the flavor that you get. For example, if I'm making a double IPA and 5%, 10% of my grist is flaked maize, I don't think you're going to taste that over all of the hops and even potential maltiness from the grains that I'm using, or the barley malt grains that I'm using. But if I really wanted to get that corn flavor, I could do like a 50% flaked maize American lager that has very low hops. I mean, I get that. You're going to get some flavor from that, I'm sure. I don't think that it would be an offensive flavor at all. I quite like cream ale, and that is one of the few. When I say the word cream ale, I can smell cream ale. It's so weird. I just love that style. And like if you've ever had a Genesee or something like that, you get kind of a nice corny character from it that I think works beautifully. Now, again, there are some who will claim that no matter how little amount of corn that you use in your beer, you're going to taste corn. That's okay if you believe that. That's fine. I think the biggest reason a lot of people use it, at least for styles like IPA, is really to drive to increase that OG and then subsequently the ABV without adding characteristic to it, though, the flavor, aroma, and especially mouthfeel. I mean, would you agree with that, or have you ever used it, corn sugar or anything like that in an IPA to do that, or are you looking for that corn flavor?
Well, I think that IPA, which is going to be the focus of the style for today's experiment, maybe you're not looking so much for the flavor. And if you're throwing that many hops at it, I think it's probably going to be more challenging to pick up the flavor. So I think that in the context of like a cold IPA, it really is to help dry the beer out and in both perhaps the FG, but also just the malt base of the body to create a little bit of a more assertive, thinner beer that could work well in a West Coast style. And so it kind of just depends on what you're going for. And I definitely think there's multiple use cases.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So in terms of usage rate, and this is going to broadly cover the different types or forms of corn that we use in brewing, which we're going to get to in a minute. But usage rate, you're looking for, I looked for an average, and then I realized that it's not good to do an average because depending on the style of beer you're brewing or the type, what your intentions are with that corn, we'd have to average out each of those. So instead, I'm going to go with a range of about 5 to 25% is what I found. The most I've ever used was 22%. I was probably aiming for 25%, but I had a few beers when I was, designing that recipe. And that was in a cream ale, and that cream ale turned out excellent. And my notes on it were that it was great. But 5 to 25%. So it could be a quarter of your entire grist. And that makes sense to me. That's not something I would be afraid of, is what I'm trying to say.
No, and I've got a draft option right now at my house that's 30% corn.
Oh, wow.
And I think that Kevin Davey, the inventor of Cold IPA, said you can even go up to 40% corn. So there's definitely room to make a beer that's super heavy on the corn, and it's not going to be like a DMS bomb or anything like that.
Well, and here's the thing. I hate talking about corn. We're going to talk about DMS, or what people perceive DMS as being. I, like most people, was convinced that DMS was the smell of a freshly opened can of cream corn. And we got that from listening to other podcasts, from reading things online and whatnot. I have done 3 different flavor standards, by the way, using the DMS flavor standards where you dose a beer at, threshold levels and then going over threshold levels. 100% of the time, I never got corn. What I got was a kind of this weird range between like freshly cut pumpkin on the lighter end all the way up to just like warm ketchup, which is a weird description, and maybe it's not the best one, but I have never smelled corn when using a DMS flavor standard, which is like, isolated purified dimethyl sulfide. So have you done one of those flavor standards?
Yeah, I've done it, I think, a couple times. One of the time actually was the 2015 San Diego Homebrew Con, where I met you for the first time. And I recall that I didn't have a very strong reaction to that particular flavor spike. I'm just not that sensitive to it, I guess.
Yeah. So, but you actually kind of further my point, is that, a lot that was one of the few where this is so ass backwards here, but I could barely taste diacetyl in the flavor standards that I've done, whereas everybody else could get it. But somehow I was able to detect DMS and nobody else got it. So, I think that a lot of people, when they taste nutty or they taste grainy, if they've been primed with what DMS is, quote, supposed to taste like, corn, that might be what they taste. The reason I bring this up is because I don't think that you're going to get the DMS version of corn flavor when you use corn in your beer. If anything, you're just going to get that kind of straight corniness. I have not gotten that. And like I said, I've used up to 22% in a cream ale, which is like super low hops and all of that. So I don't want people to fear the corn. It's definitely, it's such a helpful ingredient.
Embrace the corn. So why don't we break down a few of the different types of corn that people might use for brewing? And we're going to talk kind of like about the processed form of it, or lack thereof, not really like different heirloom varieties. So let's start with the kind of raw form, which is real corn, which might be whole, it might come cracked. I actually would recommend, if you're going to buy any whole corn, have someone mill it for you if you can. Otherwise, you might need like a Corona mill, because when it's like dry, it's really hard. It could A, maybe break your mill, or B, your mill might just not effectively crush it. But yeah, so once you have this stuff ready to go, you're really going to need a cereal mash, because it doesn't have that malting process, so it doesn't have that full enzymatic and package inside of it. So I'm not a cereal mashing expert, but as I understand it, you need to take your cereal grain, like this raw corn, and then mix it with like 10% of the grist worth of Pilsner malt or two-row, whatever you might be using. And then you're going to get that to the gelatinization point, and then you're going to boil that. And then you're going to reunite that with your main mash, and then just continue your mash as normal. And as you can see, that's like a pretty drawn-out process, so it's not a very popular thing for homebrewers. And so, yeah, it's this really old school way of brewing, and it sounds pretty fun to try, once in a blue moon. You're looking at, with standard, yellow or white varieties, pretty low Lovibonds, like in the 1 Lovibond range. You might be getting, 30-ish points per pound per gallon. And then they say you can get this kind of earthy, rustic, complex corn flavor when you use this approach, but it's obviously going to be corn variety dependent.
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. Now, since we're talking about, quote, real corn, people are probably wondering, can I just go buy a can of corn at the grocery store and use that in my beer? You could buy whatever you want at the grocery store and make a beer with it. I wouldn't recommend doing that. But if you're going to go buy like frozen corn or canned corn, first off, look for, salt-free or low salt at the very least. Avoid creamed corn, because that usually has creamed corn in it. You don't really need to do a cereal mash, because in the canning process, they bring that corn temperature up to the gelatinization point. So that apparently is, I've never done this, so I'm speaking purely based on what I looked up, because I figured we might avoid of several emails by laying this out. You can do it. It is not going to give you the same result as if you use, one of the other versions of corn that we're going to talk about here in a minute. But yes, answering your question now, it is absolutely possible. I do not recommend it. The internet doesn't recommend it, but if you want to do it, send me some and I'll try it on the show with my friends.
Well, Marshall, it's called a cream ale. You don't use creamed corn?
You know what? We should do it. And what if it turns out? What if it turns out to be the best cream ale we ever made? It tastes like cream. Who knows?
I'm sure Drew Beecham has done it
alongside his avocado beers and all that.
Oh my
stuff.
God!
Yeah, I know. One of the types of corn that I've used quite a bit actually in my brewing are corn grits. These are corns that have had, or it's a type of corn that where the hull has been removed, the kernel is dried and then ground into really small bits. Now, if you're using standard grits, it's a good idea to do a cereal mash. But most people, I think, when they're brewing, they reach for quick grits because they are pre-gelatinized. So you can just throw them in your mash. It's a really small grain. If you've ever made grits, I love eating grits as well. It's so small that if depending on the type of brewing system that you have, you might run into some issues. Chances are it's not going to be filtered out by a stainless mesh basket, but it absolutely will be filtered out by a brew in a bag. That's a small enough weave to retain those small bits of corn grits. It works insanely well. I remember the first time I did it was probably 7 or 8 years ago. I was making a cream ale and I didn't have flaked maize, and it was on a Sunday and the homebrew shop was closed. So I ran to my local grocery store and just bought the most granola looking version of corn grits that I could find that had nothing in it. And it worked beautifully. I got exactly the same, extraction efficiency that I would have expected from flaked maize. Again, I didn't taste corn in it, but they do say that grits will impart a mild corn flavor. It's about 32 ppg, again, points per pound per gallon, and only 1 degree Lovibond.
Yeah, and I've heard that quick grits may not be the best quality thing to use in your beer. And so, like I said earlier, so I've heard, quality does make a difference. And if you're interested in some really great corn flavors, maybe quick grits are not the best way to get there.
And if you're going to go, I've heard that as well, but I used quick grits specifically because I believe the first beer I used it on was a short and shoddy, so it makes sense. And I wasn't looking to, contribute a bunch of flavor to this beer. I wanted to use it for, to get a higher OG without getting any flavor, without getting any aroma, or without contributing to the mouthfeel. And it did exactly that. If you're looking to get, some corny flavor, look for some boutique, corn grits or whatever. You're probably going to have to do a cereal mash. Again, the idea behind a cereal mash is that you're bringing the starches in that corn up to that gelatinization temperature that you can then throw, or at least to get the enzymes from the barley malt working on those corn starches. Then you throw it back into your main mash and you're good to go. If you don't do that, you're not going to get conversion from the corn. You might still get the flavor though.
Mm-hmm. So there's 2 more types of corn that we want to talk about, and these are actually going to be the focus of today's comparative experiment. The first one is flaked maize, and I would guess that if any homebrewer has used corn in their brew, this is probably the most likely one that they've used. And this is a process where they steam and press the corn with rollers to flatten those kernels out. And at that point, you've actually pre-gelatinized the adjunct, and so no cereal mash is needed. You can put this straight into your barley wort or your barley mash, up to 40%, perhaps even, no problem. And you're going to get a pretty good PPG, maybe even up to 40. And you're getting a light sweetness with some light corn flavor, really low Lovibond. So it could be a really good way to add some points of gravity and really lighten the beer out.
Yeah, and when we talk about the flavor that you get from flaked maize, that the internet will tell you get this nice light sweetness. I have to believe, I've used so much flaked maize over the last 20 years. I have to believe that sweetness is probably alcohol sweetness because it does not taste like corn. If I've ever gotten a corn flavor using flaked maize, this is stupid sounding. I didn't notice it. It is such a wonderful ingredient for keeping the body of a beer nice and light and crushable, and yet still contributing that fermentable sugar that the yeast doesn't hate. There's a lot of concern about certain types of sugar that yeast might not work as well with compared to maltose, but I'm telling you, you throw in some corn sugar, you throw in some flaked maize. I guess I don't even have corn sugar on this list, but that's another one that acts to me very similar to flaked maize, very easily dissolved in your wort, and it is almost 100% fermentable by brewer's yeast. So I'm a big fan of flaked maize. Now, one thing I have never used is malted corn. In fact, it was only like 5 years ago that I even knew that this was a thing. When I Googled, what's the history of malted corn? People have been malting corn for a long time, but in the world of brewing, it is actually a fairly novel ingredient for brewers to reach for.
I think so, at least in the modern era. Maybe there's some earlier, examples pre-prohibition or something like that. But in the modern craft era, it seems it's something that you might find from more boutique maltsters like Boot Shoot or Tex Malt. But yeah, it's, take some corn and malt it like it would be barley, basically. And so there's germination, drying, kilning. And in theory, the result is an activation of enzymes that convert those starches to sugars when mashed, just like you would a barley or maybe more akin to wheat malt.
Yeah. That's how I think of it. If it's a cereal grain, it can arguably it can be malted, and if it can be malted, then you've activated the enzymes that we rely on to convert starches into sugar. so that we can then ferment, And so the fact that this is as new as it is, it's weird being in 2026, and thinking that this hasn't been done already for hundreds of years. I feel like in brewing, so much of what we do has already been done. So, malted corn is is a unique ingredient. It can be a little bit darker than the other forms of corn that we've talked about, upwards of, 2 degrees Lovibond, which you're probably not going to notice much of a color difference. But then again, flaked maize can be like 0.5 degrees Lovibond. It can be so light, contribute very little color to beer. So maybe that's one of the things that we might expect to see different when using these. But again, malted corn means that it has it can self-convert. It's got all of those enzymes ready to go to convert those starches. So I would think that if you're, ostensibly, if you're using the same amount of malted corn versus flaked maize in a batch of beer, you're probably going to see some differences, but that is yet to be seen. So I'm going to ask you, Jordan, why on earth, besides just clout and people, glomming on to what they read on the internet or hear from podcasters, why would people be against using corn in beer?
I think that the big beer curse is really what it is. And there's just this level of skepticism about anything that the Bud Miller Coors of the world have done.
I mean, that's the only answer. I honestly, I don't know why. I don't know why anybody would be so. I mean, there was that period of time between. I can only, I only dipped into this whole hobby and the craft beer thing back in 2003 or 2002, and from that time up until, I don't know, about 2012, 13 or so, it was like the popular thing to hate on big beer. And I get it. There are other reasons, valid reasons, that people would hate on big corporate breweries. But the fact that they're using something like corn in their brewing always seemed just so trivial to me. Like they just needed another thing to hang their hateful hat on, if as it were. So, the other concerns that I can think of, I think that's like 99% of the concern. But, we break it down a little bit more. People will say that it cheapens beer. It makes it taste less beery, and that it creates piss beer, I've heard. I don't know. It doesn't taste like DMS, but I could see some people saying that maybe it would contribute that off flavor that is reminiscent of DMS. But other than that, there's really no other reason other than, I think, sentiment why people would hate on it or avoid it. And so I'm a lover of it. I'll go on record as saying that. Now, in the experiment that you did comparing flaked maize to malted corn, you focused on a cold IPA, which the BJCP doesn't have a description for, but we're going to stick with what we discussed, the description I found via AI that we talked about on last week's episode. And that is an aggressively hopped, straw-colored beer designed for pure hop expression. It's lighter in body than a West Coast IPA and cleaner than an IPL. That's fair game, yeah?
Yeah, but I think there's two other distinctive components of a cold IPA that set it apart from others. One is a lager fermentation at like 60 degrees Fahrenheit traditionally. And the other is the heavy-handed use of adjunct, either rice or corn. 30 to 40% is the recommended percentage there, the rest being all Pilsner malt. So as you can see, if we wanted to test various corn types, what a cool style to try it out on.
Oh, it's a perfect style to try it out on if we're not going cream ale, We want to see how this impact. That's such a high amount of corn usage, even compared to cream ale. So like I've said, I've used corn many times over the years that I've been brewing, usually in cream ale or Mexican style lager, sometimes in double IPA. However, I've yet to get my hands on malted corn. You did get some malted corn, Jordan, and you used it in a fascinating experiment. We're going to get to those results when we're back from this break.
There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. Anybody who has ever sampled raw barley next to barley malt knows very well that they taste different. So it makes sense to me that malted corn would taste different than something like flaked corn, and that those differences might be apparent in beers that they're used in. But that's just my own speculation. Jordan, you actually put it to the test.
Right. And you know me, I'm always scheming for legitimate IPA type experiments. And I really do think that there is a valid thing to test here is, does the type of adjunct you're using matter in a cold IPA if you're using this many hops? And so this is a very style-specific experiment. Let's get into the recipe. So with a cold IPA, you want a good chunk of adjunct in there. So we did 60% Pilsner malt and then 40% flaked maize or blue malted corn. So the flaked maize I used was just the standard Brice yellow flaked corn. And then the malted corn was sent to me by our contributor, Will, and it was from Tex Malt. And so he actually had done an experiment using malted corn. We talked about this on the pod, or you and Will did about 100 episodes back. So listeners can look that up to see how the straight malted corn versus or 100% Pilsner malt versus a blend of malted corn and Pilsner malt went. But for this one, we're actually testing the type of corn in a cold IPA format.
So for cold IPA, this is a style I've yet to brew, but I'm very much looking forward to brewing one soon. Are you typically, I'm not even going to ask about the corn, are you typically using Pilsner malt and not pale malt? Is that's the norm?
Well, I like having some kind of stock ingredients I just kind of try to use in any given recipe. And for me, that's Imperial's Global, the 3470 strain, and some sort of German Pilsner malt. And so I don't keep two-row. I think that 3470 does great for ale fermentations, and I think Pilsner malt does great for, quote, ale styles. And so it's just easier to have one type on hand, so it's just what I use.
Yeah, I have found many years ago, I didn't have any pale malt on hand when I thought I did. I forgot to click that button in Brewfather or whatever to remove it from my inventory. And so I had a whole bunch of Pilsner malt, and I was like, whatever, I'll use that. And I actually liked the outcome much more than I did using pale malt. I think there are some styles, I think most English styles benefit from some Maris Otter. That's a pale malt. But when I make an IPA these days, I'm using Pilsner malt as well. There's something about that nice light, kind of just very lightly bready character that you get from it. But you're using, almost half, 40%. That's a lot of corn relative to other styles of beer, or what most people, I think, are using. I guess cold IPA, it sounds like that might be the norm. But that's going to cut into any of that character that you're going to get from the Pilsner malt, right?
That's the idea, right? And with all the hops present, we'll see if it actually matters. But given that the recommendation was 30 to 40%, let's go all the way up for the purpose of the experiment.
Yeah, I love it.
So with these types of beers, I'm just doing a single infusion mash. For a more traditional European lager, I'd probably do a step mash. But for this, I'm looking at 146F or 63C for 1 hour. And, in theory, a malted corn and a flaked corn should both be able to be just added straight to the mash at the single infusion temperature and convert. So let's see if that actually occurs. So once those mashes were complete, I removed the grains and boiled for 60 minutes with ounce or 28 grams of Nectaron at the 60-minute mark for bittering, and then a half ounce or 14 grams of Nectaron at 10 minutes. And then once those boils were finished, I performed a 10-minute hop stand with 71 grams of Nectaron and 57 grams of Citra. At which point I chilled those down and put them into identical fermenters. And wow, what a difference we saw in the original gravities.
This first off, I feel like we've said this a handful of times in the 425, or 424 prior episodes to this one, but I would have expected the opposite. First off, secondly, the difference is wild. I'm going to go ahead and do the big reveal here. Flaked maize, that sweet wort or that wort post boil had an OG of 1069. That's what I would expect. I looked at your recipe for this as I was prepping for this episode. That all lines up with what I would expect. The malted corn, the corn that was malted in the same way that barley is, that you would expect to convert, was 20 SG lower than the flaked maize batch, meaning 1049 OG compared to 1069 OG. I want to ask you what you make of that, but can you make anything of that? That just seems so crazy to me.
I think there's a couple things that could be going on here. One, it could be that the points per the PPG is just miserable for this malted corn, and so you have to use a ton to get anything out of it. The other thing could be that maybe this malted corn really needs an adjusted mash approach, and the rule of thumb, it's like, yeah, just add it to your grist like you would Pilsner malt and it will be fine. Maybe it wasn't. A little bit of internet research suggests that the gelatinization temperature for malted corn could be 143 to 165 F, so we should be covered. But clearly, to me, it seems that it didn't do a good job gelatinizing, and some suggest that you could go up to 158 F to actually hit that gelatinization point. So maybe a step mash. Maybe I should have just cereal mashed this thing, even though it was malted. But it seems to me it didn't really work.
Well, or maybe it's just broken. I don't know. But I will say this, that if I bought malted corn, and I'm not talking about the maltster here, but if I bought malted corn, the reason that I would have bought that, and just being me, would be for the reasons that we talked about in the last segment, to increase the OG while contributing, little in the way of aroma, flavor, and mouthfeel. If I used it and I got a lower OG than was planned on my recipe, I would feel like it was just broken, or that I did something entirely wrong when you clearly did not. The flaked maize acted exactly how I would expect, but also what I've come to expect, having used it as many times as I have. That malted corn just didn't do much.
Well, and you said maybe I was broken. That's a good point, is how I crushed it. I used a food processor to, crush it up because I just didn't trust my mill. I don't think my mill could have handled it because these are fairly large kernels, right?
Yeah.
And it wouldn't fit through that mill gap. And so I pulverized it to, grit, like a big grit, like not quite as fine as like polenta, but, broke it down really good. And you would think that was enough. So maybe my pulverizing wasn't sufficient, but I'm guessing that the malting process did not really give it the enzymatic package to really mimic a barley malt.
Well, yeah, and I think that's I would have prepared it the same way you did, and that is exactly, you get it down to even bigger than polenta grits type of deal. As the only reason we mill stuff is to open up access to the starches. When you're grinding something in a Cuisinart or whatever, a food processor, that's exactly what you did. So this is mind-boggling to me. It doesn't really make much sense, but we have seen time and time again on mash temperature experiments that, or I guess those weren't mash temperature, but that ultimately at the end, that a difference in ABV, which this is obviously going to have, or predictably going to have, that some people can't taste it anyway. So what we're really looking for is there a difference flavor-wise between these beers? I don't know how you don't taste a 20 OG difference, but let's carry on.
So those fermenters then went into my cold box to finish chilling. Down to 59F or 15C, and I fermented each with Imperial Yeast L26 Pilgrimage. That's the on-deck strain. And after a couple weeks, we added the dry hops. That's 113 grams of Nectaron, 85 grams of Strata, and a single packet of the El Dorado Incognito. And now that I'm reading this out loud, I'm thinking that I probably would have added the El Dorado Incognito as a dip hop because that doesn't really flow very well. So probably would have added that during the yeast pitch. And after that fermentation was over and that dry hop phase was over, 24 hours later, we see fairly similar FGs despite the massive difference in OG. Flaked maize 1011, malted corn 1008.
I mean, we don't have it written down in front of us, but that's got to be about at least a 1.5-2% ABV difference right there. Is that enough for people to taste? I don't know. The fact the malted corn did get down to 1008 though gives me a little bit of hope that these kind of even themselves out a tiny little bit, a very small amount, but I'm still just astonished that those OGs were 20 points apart. That's so crazy to me.
All right, so then, cold crashing that, transfer it to CO2 purge kegs, get it cold, get it clear. And then, so once we're pouring these into glasses, we do see a slight difference. The flaked maize beer is very light, pale, straw, and clear, while that malted corn batch was more copper. It was kind of weird, but it is a blue corn, so there's some SRM there. So I guess the color difference isn't too surprising.
Yeah, the color difference is interesting, but I would, as I was prepping these notes again, I was looking at those images going, all right, is this because of the malting or is it because of the color of the corn? And so I looked into it, and sure enough, the color of the corn will contribute color to the beer. Though you look at it, anybody with eyes that work at least will look at these beers and go, well, that's not blue though. Yeah, it's not, but it still adds darkness. The way I would describe it is it's a richer yellow color than the Flaked maize batch, which looks exactly like every cold IPA I've ever drank.
Yeah, and with like the pink heirloom varieties, I've heard that the wort can look kind of pink, but after fermentation is done, it's not exactly a glass of flamingo feathers or anything like that. Right. So let's get into my semi-blinds. So I know the variable, but I don't know which samples in which cup. I got it 5 out of 5. Marshall, this was one of the easiest ones I've ever done in all of my experiments, and I hate to say it, but the malted corn beer sucked. It had this like earthy splash of dirt flavor, and it really kind of muted the hops for some reason. It had this like medicinal quality. It was frankly gross. Whereas the flake corn version was like what you'd expect, bright hop character, that little bit of the alcoholic bite. Really nice example on the flake side of a cold IPA.
So this is the first and I'm assuming last time that you used malted corn.
It's not the last, actually. I've got a different malted corn variety on tap right now, and I'm really liking it. So we'll talk about that in a future episode, I'm sure. But just to put it out there, you can make a great beer with malted corn. Just maybe what Will had, he had sat on it too long. I don't know, but the one that I used was not good.
That is just so interesting to me. And we're talking just about your own personal impressions here. We have yet to get into the taster results, but I'm trying to figure, like in my head, what would the malting process do scientifically, right, to change the character of that corn so much that the beer wasn't even. Did you dump this keg or what?
I think I did. And,
oh man,
given that it didn't seem to contribute very many points of gravity, it's possible I extracted all these crappy flavors with none of the sugar. So maybe I only got the bad stuff, and you really need to access the full enzyme package for this to be a good product. Who knows? Maybe if I had done a cereal mash, or maybe if I had done a step mash and gone up to closer to 160 degrees Fahrenheit, I could have made a really tasty beer. Or maybe if it was younger, or it was just like a bad bag, who knows? So yeah, it didn't work out for me that time.
Yeah, that is, and again, we'll move on to the taster results here, but just, I trust your palate, and that is just such a wild outcome. Now, you did serve these beers in a triangle test to 23 participants, out of which 13 would have been expected to get the triangle test correct, or to identify the odd beer out, in order for us to say with some level of confidence that there really does seem to be a difference imparted by the variable, which in this case is flaked versus malted corn. In the end, how many actually identified the unique sample?
We got 13, which is nearly 60%. That is statistically significant. Tasters could reliably tell apart a cold IPA with flaked maize versus malted blue corn.
This is a really good opportunity for us to talk just a minute at least on, the triangle test and statistics in general. And I'm going to try to keep it as basic as possible. 23 tasters. Out of those 23, 10 of them, that is almost half, did not tell these beers, could not identify the unique sample. So to them, ostensibly, they tasted the same. You, Jordan, the brewer, with a great palate, could easily tell them apart, and weren't a big fan, or you were not a big fan of the one made with malted corn. This to me is such a good example. People love to call us out. Oh, you have shitty tasters or what? I mean, if you're going to call our tasters bad, then you're equally as bad, because they're the same people that you are. I don't know what else to say about that. We're not telling them anything about the experiment. They don't know anything about it. This is an interesting one, because I'm sitting here wondering, like, would I have been able to tell them apart?
And I have a feeling a lot of our listeners are wondering the same thing. In this case, 13 did, but that's the amount that we needed. That was the threshold. There was still 10 people who couldn't tell these beers apart. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, here's the thing, is the triangle test is a fairly blunt instrument, and the human palate is not perfect. It's not a scientific, apparatus that we can measure these things. And if you had a really spicy burrito before you took your test, you might not, or maybe you're a little sick, right? And so there's like measurement error that exists within the humans. And also like the carryover effect where you taste a beer and then you taste your second sample and then there's some like lingering flavor on your tongue. The triangle test is kind of hard. And so I will like really train myself on beers that are more similar than they are different to try to get it right. Sometimes I get it, sometimes I don't. And so to have a beer that's getting like 90% of people getting it correct, that needs to be night and day. And so even this was pretty night and day to me. And that just shows, I think, how challenging a triangle test can be. And so that's why we run statistics and that's why we need sample sizes, because humans are not going to get it right, even if it is fundamentally different. And we saw that here with only 57% getting it right. And a beer that I thought was pretty starkly different.
Well, and I can reference several past experiments. People loved it. Oh, nothing. It's so funny to pretend that everything comes back non-significant. Almost 40% of our results are significant. People don't ever mention that, but it's easier to remember the ones that shock you, though. When they confirm your bias, then you just kind of let you use that to you'll bring it up when your friends are asking you about it, but other than that, you forget about it. We've done several experiments in the past that were significant where, out of the 20, give or take a few people who participated, 18 get it, right. The triangle test, right. That's kind of what you'd expect to see. In this one, almost half, didn't get it. And to me, it's like that really is an indicator at the very least that these beers were probably a little bit more similar than they were different. But the part that blows my mind is that they were 20 OG points apart. Like, that is so crazy to me. That is barely even a part of what you were actually looking at was the, perceptible impact of using flaked versus malted corn. But that very measurable objective difference in OG and ultimately ABV was still not detectable by people who drink beer. I mean, you serve these at your homebrew club meeting. They could barely tell it apart despite that ABV difference. I think is just fascinating to me. Now, one of the things that we do when there is a significant result is we ask the people who were correct on the triangle test to put one of the cups aside so that they're comparing just the two that are different and picking the one, pick the one that you like the most out of these two. This is wild to me as well. Now, 10 of the 13 preferred the flaked maize beer. We have 4 options, by the way. You prefer one, you prefer the other. You don't have a preference despite tasting a difference, or you can just straight up say, I actually don't taste much of a difference between these beers. In this case, there were only 2 selected. 10 people preferred the flaked maize beer. 3 people preferred the malted corn beer. So all of that stuff that you said personally that you weren't a big fan of in that malted corn cold IPA, 3 people liked it more than the other one. I mean, that, again, those little gentle reminders that we get here at Brülosophy that preference is so subjective. It's just so interesting to me.
Yeah, I recall I did an experiment on hop water, and then one of the batches was super oxidized, and it was like dirty dishwater. It was disgusting. Ugh. And there was I think one guy who's like, I really like this one. And so, you could serve someone, rat poison. They might prefer that over an IPA. So there's always one out there that somehow likes the gross one. So, but I think the preference data is pretty clear that the malted corn beer for most people was inferior.
I mean, I think we can say with at least, let's just call it 70%, I don't even know, 70% confidence that flaked maize is going to, at least in this scenario, using the type of malted corn that you used, flaked maize is going to get you more where you want to go
than that malted corn. And I that is a result I just was not expecting. So we do have one reader comment I want to get to, and this one comes from somebody who calls themselves the Rob Father, and they said 20 gravity points and 2% difference in ABV is why they invented gelatinization. You clearly did not extract the starches from the malted corn. They were still all bound up and not available to be converted to sugar. Now, before you respond to this, Jordan, people love to speak as though they're the experts on all of this stuff. I mean, it's the same thing with off flavors that I brought up earlier. Most people aren't. They're hobbyists who read books and listen to podcasts and get on the internet, and then they feel like an expert. Dunning-Kruger is alive and well, and I'm not trying to diss DeRob Father by any means, but there's no way to know whether those starches were actually converted or not. Maybe the starches were gone for some reason, or maybe there was some other, explanation for that difference. But what are your thoughts on what DeRob Father had to say?
I think it's a reasonable assumption or guess, but hey, man, I followed directions. They said you can just add it to the mash like you would any other, and a single infusion mash should be sufficient. So at the very least, this is testing using blue corn versus flaked maize in a single infusion 146F mash. And at least in this instance, it didn't work very well for me.
Well, and like you said, you've got a beer on tap right now that was made with malted corn that you do enjoy. So it may just be a variety difference. It may just be a maltster difference. Who knows? But I find these results just super, super interesting. That does bring us to the end of this episode. Don't forget to check out the awesome brewing content over on the Brülosophy Show, which you can subscribe to at youtube.com/@thebrülosophy Show. And as always, you can read more about the experiment we discussed by clicking the link to the article on brülosophy.com in the description of this episode. The Brülosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman, no.